The boy's eyes never left Ethan's face as he pointed silently toward the crumpled car in the ditch, his sister's small hand clutched tightly in his own. In that moment, standing on a lonely country road with the evening light fading around them, Ethan Harris recognized something in these silent children that he hadn't seen in 25 years. Not since he'd been a frightened child, fleeing in the night with his mother. The road stretched empty before him, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through golden fields that swayed in the evening breeze. Ethan Harris loosened his tie with one hand, keeping the other on the wheel of his Audi. The leather seat had long since warmed to his body, a small comfort on this solitary drive. His phone buzzed again from the passenger seat. Third time in 20 minutes. The board meeting would start without him. Unusual, but not unprecedented. What was unprecedented was his decision to take the scenic route home, a detour with no purpose except to delay his arrival at another sterile conference room. At 42, Ethan had accumulated the trappings of success that once seemed to matter. The investment firm that bore his name, the modernist house overlooking the bay, the carefully curated life of a man who had overcome his circumstances. Yet lately, he'd found himself driving these back roads more often, seeking something the highway couldn't provide. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the landscape. He switched off his phone entirely and rolled down the window. The scent of dry grass and distant rain filled the car. For the first time that day, he took a deep breath. That's when he saw them, two small figures at the roadside, perhaps a quarter-mile ahead. Children, it seemed, though at this distance he couldn't be sure. His foot eased off the accelerator instinctively. As he drew closer, the scene came into focus. Two children, a boy and girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, standing unnaturally still. They weren't playing or walking, just standing, their faces turned toward his approaching car. Twins, he realized as he slowed further. The girl's hair was longer, but their faces bore the unmistakable symmetry of shared DNA. Something in their posture made him pull over entirely, gravel crunching beneath his tires as he stopped 30 feet away. Their clothes were dirty, faces smudged. The boy stood slightly in front of his sister, one hand reaching back to hold hers. Neither child moved or called out. Instead, the boy raised his free hand and pointed toward the ditch that ran alongside the road. Ethan stepped out of his car, the door closing behind him with a solid thunk that seemed too loud in the evening stillness. "Hello there," he called, keeping his voice gentle. "Are you two okay?" No response. The boy continued pointing, his arm steady despite what Ethan now recognized as fear in his eyes. Following the direction of the child's gesture, Ethan noticed tire tracks cutting through the tall grass. His stomach tightened as he spotted it. The metallic glint of a car, half hidden in the drainage ditch, its front end crumpled against the opposite bank. "Is someone hurt?" he asked, already moving toward the wreck, scanning the children for signs of injury. They appeared physically unharmed, but their stillness troubled him. The boy nodded once, his expression unchanged. "Stay right there," Ethan said, pulling his phone from his pocket and switching it back on. He dialed 911 as he approached the crash vehicle, an older model sedan blue, with peeling paint and a cracked windshield. The driver's side door hung open at an awkward angle. 911, what's your emergency? There's been an accident on County Road 27, about 15 miles east of Mill Creek. Car in a ditch, 2 children on the roadside. Ethan moved closer to the wreck, his dress shoes sinking slightly in the soft earth. "I don't see the driver yet." Then he did. A woman slumped over the steering wheel, dark hair obscuring her face. Blood had dried in a thin line from her temple down her neck, disappearing into the collar of her shirt. "I've found the driver," he told the dispatcher, his voice dropping. "Adult female, unconscious, head injury. The children appear unharmed, but they're not speaking. Sir, emergency services are on their way. Estimated arrival is 22 minutes. Can you check if the driver has a pulse without moving her?" Ethan carefully reached through the open door, pressing 2 fingers against the woman's neck. Her skin was cool, but not cold. "There's a pulse. Weak, but present." "Good. Please don't move her unless absolutely necessary. Are the children in a safe location away from traffic?" Ethan glanced back at the twins, still standing exactly where he'd left them. Yes, they're safe. They appear to be in shock. After assuring the dispatcher he would stay until help arrived, Ethan ended the call and returned to the children. He crouched down to their eye level, maintaining a respectful distance. "My name is Ethan," he said. "Help is coming for your mom. Can you tell me your names?" The boy and girl exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, the boy spoke, his voice barely audible. "Noah," he said, then, nodding toward his sister, Lily. "Noah and Lily," Ethan repeated. "You're being very brave. Would you like to wait in my car? It might be more comfortable." Another silent exchange between the twins. Noah shook his head. "We stay where we can see her," he said. Ethan nodded. "I understand. Is there anyone else I should call? Your dad, maybe?" The reaction was immediate. Lily shrank back, her hand tightening in her brother's. Noah's face hardened, something too old for his years flashing in his eyes. "No," he said firmly. That single word, and the fear behind it, told Ethan more than a lengthy explanation could have. He'd grown up with that same fear, recognized it in the slight flinch that accompanied Noah's response. "Okay," he said simply. "We'll just wait for the ambulance then." He removed his suit jacket and spread it on the ground. "You can sit if you want. It might be a little while." The twins remained standing, their eyes moving between Ethan, the crashed car, and the empty road stretching in both directions. Waiting, Ethan realized, but not just for the ambulance. They were watching for someone else. When the distant wail of sirens finally broke the silence, Lily whispered something to her brother. Noah nodded and turned to Ethan. "Will you come with us?" he asked. "To the hospital?" The request surprised him. These children didn't know him, had no reason to trust him. Yet something in their situation had created a tenuous bond, the kind formed in moments of crisis, when strangers become sudden allies. "Yes," Ethan said without hesitation. "I'll come with you." As the ambulance crested the hill, lights flashing against the darkening sky, Ethan made a quick call to his assistant, canceling the meeting entirely. Some decisions required no deliberation at all. The fluorescent lights of Riverdale Memorial Hospital cast harsh shadows across the waiting room's faded blue chairs. Ethan sat with his elbows on his knees, tie loosened and shirt sleeves rolled up, watching the twins who occupied chairs across from him. 3 hours had passed since they'd arrived, the ambulance wailing through the gathering dusk, paramedics working with quiet efficiency to stabilize the woman, Rachel Miller, according to the ID in her wallet, before transporting her. Noah and Lily sat with the unnatural stillness Ethan had observed at the roadside. No fidgeting, no complaints about the wait, just watchful silence. Noah maintained a protective position, angled slightly toward his sister, eyes constantly scanning the room's entrances. Lily held a paper cup of untouched apple juice, her gaze fixed on the double doors through which their mother had disappeared. A social worker named Diane had spoken with them briefly. Her questions met with minimal responses. When she'd suggested the children might need to be placed in emergency care while their mother was treated, Noah's face had gone rigid with panic. "We stay with him," he'd said, pointing to Ethan. The declaration had startled everyone, Ethan most of all. He'd explained to Diane that he was merely a passerby who'd stopped to help, but something in Noah's desperate expression had made him add, "But I'm happy to stay until we know more about their mother's condition." Now, as the clock on the wall ticked past 10 p.m., Ethan wondered what he'd gotten himself into. His phone had been buzzing periodically with messages from colleagues about the missed meeting, but the device remained untouched in his pocket. "Are you hungry?" he asked the twins, breaking the long silence. Lily looked to Noah, who gave a slight nod. "The cafeteria's closed, but I saw some vending machines down the hall." Ethan said, standing, "Would you like to come with me, or should I bring something back?" "We'll come," Noah said, helping Lily for a chair. The three walked silently down the corridor, fluorescent lights humming overhead. At the vending machines, Ethan let the children select their own snacks, noting how they conferred in whispers before making choices that seemed oddly practical. Granola bars and crackers rather than the candy most children would gravitate toward. As they returned to the waiting area, a doctor in blue scrubs approached. "Mr. Harris?" she asked, consulting the clipboard in her hands. "Yes," Ethan replied, Surprised she knew his name. He must have given it during the admission process, though much of that blur of activity remained hazy in his memory. I'm Dr. Chun. I've been treating Ms. Miller. She glanced at the children, then back to Ethan. Could we speak privately for a moment? Noah immediately stepped closer to Ethan. We want to hear too, he said firmly. Dr. Chen's expression softened as she crouched to the boy's level. Your mom is going to be okay, Noah. She has a concussion and some bruised ribs, and we needed to put a few stitches in her forehead. But she's awake now and asking for you both. Relief visibly washed over the twins, but Noah remained tense. What else? He asked, surprising the doctor with his perception. Dr. Chen glanced at Ethan, who gave a small nod. Whatever was happening here went beyond a simple car accident, and these children seemed to know more than they were saying. We found some older injuries, Dr. Chen said carefully. Healed fractures and scarring that suggest your mom might have been hurt before. Do you know anything about that? The twins exchanged another of their silent communications. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but Noah's face hardened into a mask. Dad gets mad sometimes, he said simply. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Dr. Chen nodded, her expression carefully neutral despite the flash of anger in her eyes. I see, she said. Thank you for telling me. Noah, that was very brave. She stood and addressed Ethan. Ms. Miller is in room 214. She's asked to see the children, and then she'd like to speak with you. Ethan raised an eyebrow. With me? She doesn't even know me. She knows you brought her children safely to the hospital, Dr. Chen replied. That seems to be enough for now. As they walked toward Rachel's room, Ethan felt a small hand slip into his. Lily looked up at him, her face solemn, and squeezed his fingers once before letting go as they reached the door. The room was dimly lit, the rhythmic beeping of monitors providing a quiet backdrop. Rachel Miller lay propped against pillows, a bandage across her forehead and in four in her arm. Despite the bruising along her jawline and the pallor of her skin, Ethan could see she was beautiful. Dark hair, delicate features, and eyes that widened with relief when the twins entered. My babies, she whispered, arms outstretched. Noah and Lily rushed to the bed, careful of the tubes and wires as they embraced their mother. Rachel winced slightly but held them tightly, pressing kisses to their heads and murmuring reassurances. Ethan stepped back toward the door, feeling like an intruder on this private reunion. He was about to slip out when Rachel looked up, her eyes meeting his over the children's heads. Thank you, she said, her voice stronger than he'd expected. The doctor told me what you did. Ethan shook his head. Anyone would have stopped. No, Rachel said with quiet certainty. They wouldn't have. There was something in her tone, a weary knowledge that spoke of disappointments and broken trust. That made Ethan believe her. After a few minutes, Dr. Chen returned. Children, would you mind going with Nurse Jessica for a little while? She has some juice and cookies at the nurse's station, and your mom needs a rest. Noah looked reluctant, but Rachel squeezed his hand. It's okay, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. When the twins had left with the nurse, Dr. Chen closed the door and turned to Rachel. Ms. Miller, we need to discuss your injuries. Some of them predate today's accident. Rachel's eyes flicked to Ethan, then back to the doctor. I prefer to discuss this privately. Mr. Harris can step out. Dr. Chen agreed, but I should inform you that hospital policy requires us to report suspected domestic abuse to the authorities. Rachel's hands twisted in the thin blanket. He'll find us, she whispered. He always does. Ethan, who had been moving toward the door, stopped. Your husband? He asked quietly. Rachel nodded, a single tear tracking down her cheek. Travis. He's connected. Police, local government. The last time I tried to leave, he had a friend on the force bring me home. Her voice broke. He said next time he'd make sure I couldn't take the children. Dr. Chen made a note on her clipboard. Ms. Miller, I'll contact our patient advocate. There are resources available, safe houses. No, Rachel interrupted. He knows people at the women's shelter, too. That's how he found us last time. She looked up at Ethan, something desperate in her gaze. The accident today, it was an accident. I was running. Again, but he'll be looking for the car. The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Ethan found himself thinking of his own mother, how she fled with him in the middle of the night when he was 9, driving until they reached a town where no one knew them, how they lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat while she worked 3 jobs, how they jumped at every knock on the door for years. "I have a property," he said suddenly. "A house about 2 hours from here, in Willow Creek. It's secluded, secure. You and the children could stay there until you figure out your next steps." Dr. Chin looked startled. "Mr. Harris, that's very generous, but why would you do that?" Rachel interrupted. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You don't know us." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "My mother was in your position once. Someone helped us when we had nowhere else to go." He paused. "I'm not asking for anything in return, if that's what you're worried about. The house is sitting empty, and it has a good security system." Rachel studied him, her expression guarded but desperate. "I can't pay you. I'm not asking for payment. And if I want to leave, then you leave," Ethan said simply. No questions asked. Dr. Chin looked between them. "Ms. Miller, while Mr. Harris's offer is generous, I should point out that accepting help from someone you just met carries its own risks." Rachel gave a hollow laugh. "Doctor, the devil I know is actively trying to kill me. I'll take my chances with the devil I don't." She turned back to Ethan. "When can we leave?" "You need at least 24 hours of observation," Dr. Chin interjected. "The concussion—" "I've had worse," Rachel said flatly. Ethan stepped closer to the bed. "Let's do this properly. You rest tonight, and tomorrow I'll make arrangements for the house. I'll come back tomorrow evening, and if the doctor clears you, we can leave then." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "The children stay with me tonight, in this room." "I'll arrange it," Dr. Chin agreed, making another note. "And Mr. Harris, the hospital will need some information from you if you're going to be responsible for Ms. Miller's discharge." "Of course." As Dr. Chin left to check on the twins, Rachel sank back against her pillows, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Why are they so quiet?" Ethan asked suddenly. "The children, they barely spoke at the accident site, and even here—" Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Travis doesn't like noise," she said simply. "They learn to be invisible, to be perfect." She looked away. Children shouldn't have to learn that. Ethan thought of his own childhood, of hiding in closets and speaking in whispers, of the years it had taken to unlearn those habits of fear. "No," he agreed quietly. "They shouldn't." When he left the hospital an hour later, after completing paperwork and speaking again with the twins, Ethan sat in his car for a long moment before starting the engine. The decision he'd made felt momentous, yet strangely inevitable, as if he'd been moving toward this intersection his entire life. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "Carter Security," answered a gruff voice. "Jim, it's Ethan Harris. I need a full security upgrade at the Willow Creek property. Tomorrow. Money's no object." There was a pause. "Trouble?" "Not yet," Ethan replied, "but I'm expecting it." Willow Creek emerged from the mist like a painting slowly coming into focus. The afternoon sun broke through clouds, illuminating the 2-story craftsman nestled among ancient oaks. Ethan navigated the winding gravel drive, conscious of the silence that had persisted for most of the 2-hour journey from the hospital. In the rear-view mirror, he caught glimpses of Noah and Lily, their faces pressed to the windows as they took in their surroundings. Rachel sat beside him, one hand clutching the door handle, her posture rigid despite the pain medication Dr. Chin had insisted she take before discharge. "It's beautiful," she murmured, the first word she'd spoken since they'd left the main highway. "It was my grandmother's," Ethan replied, pulling to a stop near the covered porch. "I spent summers here as a boy." What he didn't say was that those summers had been his only respite, the only weeks of the year when he could sleep through the night without startling at every sound, where the refrigerator had always been full and no one had shouted, "Will anyone else be here?" Rachel asked, her eyes scanning the property with the practiced wariness of someone accustomed to assessing threats. "No, just us." Ethan paused. I had a security team out this morning. The house is equipped with cameras, motion sensors, and a direct line to the security company. The property is gated with a code that only I have. Rachel nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Thank you, she said quietly. I know this is... You don't need to keep thanking me, Ethan interrupted gently. Let's get you inside. The interior of the house was warm and inviting, with hardwood floors, exposed beams, and large windows that filled the space with natural light. A stone fireplace dominated the living room, and the kitchen beyond gleamed with updated appliances that somehow didn't detract from the home's rustic charm. The bedrooms are upstairs, Ethan explained, setting down the small bag of clothes and toiletries he'd purchased that morning. Rachel and the twins had nothing but the clothes they'd been wearing when he found them. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. I thought the twins could share the room with the twin beds, and Rachel, you can take the master. Where will you sleep? Lily asked, her voice small but clear. Ethan smiled at her. I'll take the 3rd bedroom. It's small but comfortable. You're staying? Rachel asked, surprise evident in her tone. Just until you're settled, Ethan replied. A few days, maybe a week. I can work remotely. He hesitated. Unless you prefer I didn't stay? Rachel glanced at the twins, who were watching the exchange with solemn eyes. No, she said finally. It's your house. And I think we'd all feel safer if you were here. Noah moved closer to his mother, his hand finding hers. Can we explore? He asked. Of course, Ethan said. The whole house is yours to use. There's a library through that door and a sunroom at the back. The yard is fenced all the way around. The twins looked to Rachel, who nodded. Stay together, she said. And don't go outside yet. As the children moved cautiously toward the library, Rachel sank onto the sofa, wincing slightly. Her face was pale, the bruises along her jaw more pronounced in the natural light. You should rest, Ethan said, perching on the arm of a nearby chair. Dr. Chin said, I'm fine, Rachel interrupted, though her expression belied her words. I need to... She trailed off, her hands twisting in her lap. What do you need? Ethan asked gently. Rachel looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and wariness that struck Ethan as entirely reasonable. She didn't know him, not really, and experience had clearly taught her to be cautious of men offering help. I need to understand what happens next, she said finally. This arrangement, what you expect. Ethan considered his words carefully. I expect nothing from you, Rachel. This isn't a transaction. The house is yours to use for as long as you need it. If you want me to leave after you're settled, I will. And if Travis finds us, the security system will alert us long before he reaches the house, Ethan assured her. And I've taken additional precautions. The property is owned by a trust, not directly by me. There's no paper trail connecting you to this address. Rachel nodded slowly, but Ethan could see she wasn't entirely convinced. Years of fear couldn't be erased by a few reassurances, no matter how sincere. I have some contacts in law enforcement, he continued. Not local, federal. People who can't be influenced by your husband's connections. When you're ready, they can help you file for protection, build a case. A case? Rachel repeated, a bitter smile touching her lips. Do you know how many times I've tried to file reports? How many times the paperwork has mysteriously disappeared? Travis is... She shook her head. You don't understand what he's capable of. Then help me understand, Ethan said quietly. Rachel was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the fireplace. When she spoke, her voice was distant, as if she were reciting someone else's story. I met Travis when I was 19. He was 30, successful, charming. He made me feel special, protected. My father had died the year before, and I think I was looking for someone to take care of me. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Be careful what you wish for, right? Ethan remained silent, giving her space to continue. The control started small. Suggestions about my clothes, my friends, always framed as concern. Then we got married, and it escalated. I wasn't allowed to work. My phone calls were monitored. He installed cameras in our house, For security, he said. She swallowed hard. The first time he hit me, I was pregnant with the twins. I'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning. Ethan's hands clenched involuntarily, but he kept his expression neutral. After the twins were born, things got worse. He started using them as leverage. If I didn't behave, he'd threaten to take them away. Said no court would grant custody to a mentally unstable woman with no income. Rachel's voice hardened. And he was right. The one time I tried to leave through official channels, he had me committed for 72 hours. Told him I was delusional, dangerous. By the time I was released, he convinced everyone I'd had a breakdown. And this time, Ethan asked, what was different? Rachel's eyes darkened. He started focusing on Lily, criticizing her, making her stand in the corner for hours for minor infractions. Last week, I found bruises on her arm. Her voice broke. I knew it was only a matter of time before I couldn't let that happen. Not to my children. The sound of small footsteps interrupted them as the twins returned from their exploration. Lily clutched a book to her chest, her expression brightening slightly as she approached Rachel. Mom, look, she said, holding out a worn copy of The Secret Garden. Can we read it? Rachel smiled, the first genuine smile Ethan had seen from her. Of course, sweetheart. Come sit with me. As the twins settled on either side of Rachel, Ethan rose quietly. I'll make some tea, he said, moving toward the kitchen to give them privacy. From the kitchen, he could hear Rachel's voice softening as she read, the words flowing with a gentle rhythm that seemed to calm both her and the children. He busied himself preparing a tray with tea and the sandwiches he'd picked up on the drive, his mind processing everything Rachel had told him. Travis Miller was clearly dangerous, not just physically but systematically. A man who knew how to use institutions and connections to maintain control. The standard approaches to domestic violence might not work here. They would need to be more strategic. When he returned to the living room with the tray, Ethan found Lily asleep against Rachel's side, the book open on her lap. Noah remained alert, his eyes tracking Ethan's movements as he set the tray on the coffee table. Hungry? Ethan asked quietly. Noah nodded, accepting a sandwich with murmured thanks. Rachel gently shifted Lily to a more comfortable position, but didn't wake her. She hasn't slept properly in days, Rachel explained, taking a sandwich for herself. Neither of them has. They've been so scared. And now? Ethan asked. Rachel glanced around the warm room, at the solid walls and locked doors, at her sleeping daughter and watchful son. Now, she said softly, I think we might all sleep tonight. Later, after helping Rachel settle the twins in their new room, Lily still half asleep, Noah insisting on checking the locks twice, Ethan retreated to the small study off the main hallway. The security system's control panel glowed reassuringly, showing clear perimeters on all sides of the property. His phone buzzed with a text from Jim Carter. All systems operational. Patrol scheduled as discussed. Call if needed. Ethan replied with a simple thanks, then opened his laptop to check emails. The business hadn't collapsed in his absence, though his assistant had flagged several matters requiring his attention. He worked quietly for an hour, the familiar tasks a welcome distraction from the weight of responsibility he'd taken on. A soft knock at the door interrupted his concentration. Rachel stood in the doorway, her hair damp from a shower, dressed in the simple pajamas he'd purchased along with other necessities. The twins are asleep, she said. I just wanted to check that everything is secure. Ethan gestured to the monitors. All clear. The system would alert us to any disturbance on the property. Rachel nodded, lingering in the doorway. I keep waiting, she admitted, for the catch. For you to tell me what you want in return. Ethan closed his laptop and turned to face her fully. There's no catch, Rachel. I'm helping because I can, and because someone once helped my mother and me when we needed it. Your father, she asked hesitantly, was a lot like Travis, Ethan confirmed. My mother ran with me when I was 9. We had nothing but a suitcase and her old car. A woman she met at church let us stay in her guest room for 3 months while Mom found work and an apartment. I never forgot that. Rachel's expression softened. What happened to him? Your father? He found us when I was 14. Showed up at our apartment, drunk and violent. Ethan's voice remained steady, though the memory still carried an edge of fear. He put my mother in the hospital, but this time she pressed charges. He went to prison for assault, died there 2 years later. I'm sorry, Rachel said quietly. Ethan shrugged. It was a long time ago, but it's why I understand what you're going through, at least somewhat, and why I want to help. Rachel was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing the doorframe. The twins like you, she said finally, they don't trust easily, especially Noah. They're remarkable children, Ethan replied. Strong, like their mother. A flush colored Rachel's cheeks. We should all get some rest, she said, stepping back from the doorway. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. After she'd gone, Ethan sat for a long time, staring at the security monitors. The house was quiet, the property peaceful, but he knew better than most that peace could be deceptive, and safety was never guaranteed. Before heading to his own room, he checked the locks one more time, activated the night sensors, and placed his phone where he would hear it instantly if it rang. Small precautions against the storm he suspected was coming. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that gradually began to feel normal. Mornings found Rachel in the kitchen before anyone else, the coffee already brewing. When Ethan came downstairs, they would exchange quiet good mornings, moving around each other with growing ease as they prepared breakfast. The twins would appear next, Noah still watchful but no longer flinching at sudden movements, Lily occasionally humming to herself, a development that had brought tears to Rachel's eyes the first time she heard it. Ethan worked remotely most days, converting the study into a temporary office. Rachel spent hours in the garden, the physical labor seeming to ground her as she cleared overgrown beds and planted the seedlings they'd purchased on a careful trip to a garden center 2 towns over. The twins explored the property with increasing confidence, discovering the treehouse Ethan's grandfather had built and claiming it as their own special place. On this particular morning, however, the peaceful routine was disrupted by the chime of Ethan's phone. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting subtly as he read the message. Everything okay? Rachel asked, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs onto the table where the twins were already seated. Just work, Ethan replied, but something in his tone made Rachel look up sharply. Later, after the children had gone outside to the treehouse, Rachel found Ethan in the study, his attention focused on the security monitors. It wasn't just work, was it? She asked from the doorway. Ethan hesitated, then gestured for her to come in, closing the door behind her. My contact at the FBI has been looking into Travis, he said. They found some concerning connections. Rachel's hands tightened on the back of the chair she stood behind. What kind of connections? Money laundering, primarily. It appears Travis has been moving funds for a network involved in various criminal enterprises. Ethan's voice was carefully neutral. It explains his influence in the local community and why official channels have been so easily compromised. Rachel sank into the chair, her face pale. So he's not just abusive. He's a criminal. It gives us leverage, Ethan pointed out. The FBI is building a case, but it will take time. They need to be thorough if they're going to ensure he can't use his connections to escape charges. And in the meantime, Rachel asked, her voice tight, in the meantime, we stay vigilant. Ethan turned back to the monitors. I've increased security patrols, and Jim is installing additional cameras today while we're all here. Rachel was silent for a moment, processing this new information. The children seem happy here, she said finally. Safer. I don't want to uproot them again, unless we have to. I agree, Ethan said. This is the safest place for all of you right now. Rachel studied him, noting the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. You've been monitoring the security feeds at night, haven't you? That's why you look so tired. Ethan's smile was rueful. Old habits. I've never slept deeply. Neither have I, Rachel admitted. Not for years. Their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding, the kind that could only exist between people who had lived with the same kind of fear. Rachel looked away first, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the connection. I should check on the children, she said, rising from the chair. Ethan nodded, turning back to his work as Rachel slipped out of the study. She paused in the hallway. taking a deep breath to steady herself. The news about Travis wasn't surprising. She had always known he operated outside the law, but the confirmation still shook her. If his criminal connections were as extensive as Ethan suggested, Travis wouldn't simply give up looking for them. Through the kitchen window, she could see the twins in the treehouse, their heads bent together over something Noah was showing Lily. The sight calmed her. Whatever danger loomed, her children were safe in this moment, and that was what mattered most. The day passed uneventfully. Jim Carter arrived mid-afternoon to install the additional security cameras, his presence barely noticed by the twins, who had grown accustomed to the occasional visit from the gruff security expert. Rachel worked in the garden, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing growing things, while Ethan conducted a video conference from his study. As evening approached, Rachel prepared dinner, a skill she was rediscovering after years of Travis criticizing her cooking. Ethan had encouraged her to use the kitchen as she pleased, and she found herself experimenting with recipes she hadn't attempted since before her marriage. "Something smells amazing," Ethan said, entering the kitchen as Rachel removed a lasagna from the oven. "My grandmother's recipe," she replied, setting the dish on a trivet. "The twins love it. Or they used to before—" She trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. Ethan understood anyway. Before Travis made them afraid to express preferences, he finished quietly. Rachel nodded, her throat tight. He said it made them weak. Having favorites, wanting things. She shook her head. What kind of father thinks a child's joy makes them weak? "The kind who's afraid of anything he can't control," Ethan replied, "including happiness." Rachel called the twins in for dinner, and they gathered around a table in what had become their usual configuration. Noah and Lily on one side, Rachel and Ethan on the other. The conversation flowed more easily now, the twins occasionally contributing without being directly addressed, a sign of their growing comfort. After dinner, as they cleared the table together, the security system chimed, 3 short tones indicating a vehicle approaching the main gate. Ethan frowned, checking his phone. "I'm not expecting anyone," he said, moving quickly to the study. Rachel gathered the twins close, her heart racing as she followed Ethan. On the monitor, a delivery van idled at the gate, its logo partially obscured by mud. The driver, face hidden beneath a cap, leaned out to press the intercom button. "Delivery for Harris," came a muffled voice through the system. "I didn't order anything," Ethan said, his voice tight. He pressed the response button. "What delivery company are you with?" There was a pause before the driver replied. "Regional Express. Got a package here, needs signature." Ethan's jaw tightened. He muted the intercom and turned to Rachel. "Regional Express doesn't deliver to this area, and they certainly don't deliver at 7:30 in the evening." Rachel's arms tightened around the twins. "It's him, isn't it? Travis." "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but I'm not taking chances." He pressed a button on the security panel. "Jim, we have an unidentified delivery van at the gate. Driver's behavior is suspicious." On it came Jim's immediate response. "Security team is 3 minutes out. Keep the gate closed." Ethan turned back to the intercom. "No deliveries after hours. If you have a package, you can leave it at the gate." The driver's response was immediate and hostile. "Need a signature, man. Open the gate." "Not happening," Ethan replied firmly. "Leave the package or leave the property." Through the monitor, they watched the driver slam a hand against the steering wheel before abruptly shifting the van into reverse and backing away from the gate. Instead of turning around, however, the vehicle continued reversing down the road until it disappeared from a camera's view. "He's gone?" Lily asked in a small voice. "For now," Ethan replied, his attention still on the monitors as he cycled through different camera views. "But I want everyone to stay inside tonight." Rachel nodded, guiding the twins back to the living room. "How about movie before bed?" she suggested, trying to keep her voice light despite the fear coursing through her. Noah looked up at her, his eyes too knowing for a child his age. "It was him, wasn't it? Dad." Rachel hesitated, torn between protecting them from the truth and acknowledging what they already seemed to sense. "We don't know for sure," she said finally, "but Ethan and his security team are keeping us safe." Noah nodded solemnly. "He won't stop looking," he said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Rachel agreed, pulling him close. "But he won't find us here. I promise." Later, after the twins were finally asleep. Lily only succumbing after Rachel had checked the closet and under the bed twice, Noah insisting on keeping a flashlight beside his pillow, Rachel joined Ethan in the study. The security monitors cast a blue glow over his face as he cycled through camera feeds. "Anything?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head. Jim's team searched the area. No sign of the van. He turned to face her. "But the driver knew my name. That's concerning." Rachel sank into the chair opposite him. "Travis has resources. Connections. If he's determined to find us." "He won't," Ethan said firmly. "The property records for this house are buried under layers of trusts and corporations. Even if he suspects I'm involved, he can't trace it back here." Rachel wanted to believe him. But years of experience had taught her that Travis was relentless when he wanted something. And he wanted her and the children back. Not out of love, but out of a perverse need for control. "I should never have brought this to your door," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've put your life on hold, risked your safety." "Rachel," Ethan interrupted gently, "I made this choice, and I don't regret it." She looked up, meeting his gaze. In the weeks they'd spent together, something had shifted between them. A cautious trust building day by day, small moments of connection accumulating into something neither of them had named. "Why?" she asked simply. Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because 25 years ago, someone did the same for my mother and me. And because—" He hesitated. "Because you and the twins deserve a chance at the life you should have had all along." Rachel felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'm afraid all the time," she admitted. "Even here, even with all the security. I keep waiting for him to appear." "I know," Ethan said softly. "The fear doesn't just disappear. It took years after my father died before I stopped checking locks multiple times, before I could sleep through the night. Does it ever really go away?" Rachel asked. "Not completely," Ethan admitted, "but it fades. It stops controlling your every thought, your every decision." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You'll get there, Rachel. All three of you will." She wanted to believe him, wanted to imagine a future where Travis was a distant memory, where she and her children could live without constantly looking over their shoulders. But that future seemed impossibly distant tonight. "Get some rest," Ethan suggested. "I'll keep watch for a while longer." Rachel nodded, rising from her chair. At the door, she paused. "Ethan, thank you for understanding. For not—" She struggled to find the words. "For not telling you it's simple," he suggested. "That you should just get over it." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Yes, exactly that." After she'd gone, Ethan turned back to the monitors, scanning each feed methodically. The property remained quiet, the night still, but the knot of tension in his stomach wouldn't ease. Travis Miller had found them, or at least suspected their connection to Ethan. The question now wasn't if he would try again, but when and how far he would go to reclaim what he considered his property. Ethan's phone buzzed with text from Jim. "Team in place. Perimeter secure. Get some sleep." But sleep didn't come easily that night, not for Ethan, and he suspected not for Rachel either. In the darkness of the old house, they both kept vigil in their own ways, listening for any sound that didn't belong, watching for shadows that moved against the night. The storm was coming. They could feel it in the air, in the unnatural stillness that precedes violence. All they could do now was prepare and hope they would be strong enough to weather what was coming. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Innocuous and ordinary until it wasn't. Rachel stood at the kitchen sink, washing breakfast dishes while the twins worked on their lessons at the table, a homeschooling routine they'd established in the weeks since arriving at Willow Creek. Ethan had driven into town for supplies, the first time he left them alone since the delivery van incident 2 weeks prior. Rachel glanced at the clock. 10:17 a.m. Ethan would be back by 11. The security system was armed. Jim's team patrolling the perimeter. They were safe. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Rachel dried her hands and picked it up, expecting a text from Ethan. Instead, an unknown number displayed on the screen. She hesitated before opening the message, her stomach nodding with premonition. I see you found yourself a new protector. Touching, but temporary. Everything is temporary, Rachel. Except us. The phone slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, clattering onto the counter. Noah looked up sharply from his math worksheet, instantly alert to her distress. "Mom," he called, already rising from his chair. Rachel forced a smile, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just drop my phone." But Noah wasn't fooled. He crossed at her side, his small face serious as he looked up at her. "Is it Dad?" he asked quietly. Rachel hesitated, torn between protecting her son from the truth and acknowledging what he already seemed to know. Before she could decide, the security system chimed, not the warning tone of breach, but the gentle alert that signaled Ethan's return. Relief flooded through her as she heard his car on the gravel drive. "Ethan's back with the groceries," she said, ruffling Noah's hair. "Why don't you and Lily go help him?" The twins headed outside, and Rachel took a moment to compose herself, breathing deeply as she learned in the therapy sessions Ethan had arranged with a trauma specialist who came to the house weekly. Panic wouldn't help. She needed to think clearly. When Ethan entered, arms laden with grocery bags, Rachel was waiting. The twins followed behind him, each carrying smaller bags with solemn importance. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked immediately, reading her expression with a familiarity that had developed between them. "Kids, can you put the cold things in the refrigerator?" Rachel asked when they were occupied with the task. She showed Ethan the message. His face hardened as he read it, jaw tightening beneath his neatly trimmed beard. "He's escalating," Ethan said quietly. "This is a direct threat." "He has my number," Rachel whispered. "How did he get my number?" "This phone is new. You got it after we arrived." Ethan's expression was grim. He must have connections at the carrier. Or he's paid someone to track the account. He glanced at the twins, who were carefully arranging yogurt containers in the refrigerator. "We need to talk to Jim. And I think it's time to consider the FBI's offer." The FBI had reached out the previous week, suggesting Rachel and the twins enter witness protection. With the evidence they gathered on Travis's criminal activities, they believed they could build a case strong enough to put him away for decades. But they needed Rachel's testimony. "I know," Rachel said, running a hand through her hair. The thought of starting over again, new names, new identities. The twins having to lie about who they are for the rest of their lives. "It might be the only way to truly be free of him," Ethan said gently. Rachel nodded, her throat tight. "Let me think about it. Just a little longer." Ethan respected her need for space, turning his attention to unpacking the remaining groceries and engaging the twins in conversation about their morning lessons. But Rachel could see the concern in his eyes, the way he checked his phone more frequently, his gaze occasionally drifting to the security panel visible in the hallway. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Rachel and Ethan sat on the porch swing, the night air cool against their skin. Security lights illuminated the yard in strategic places, leaving other areas in shadow. The contrast felt symbolic somehow, islands of safety surrounded by potential danger. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Rachel said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "If we do this, witness protection, testimony, all of it, what happens to you?" Ethan looked surprised by the question. "To me? Yes." Rachel turned to face him more fully. "You've put your life on hold for us. Your business, your home in the city. You can't stay here indefinitely." "I'm not concerned about that," Ethan said, his voice gentle. "The firm runs itself for the most part. And this place," he gestured to the house behind them, "it's felt more like home these past weeks than my apartment ever did." Rachel studied him in the soft porch light, seeing beyond a successful businessman to the boy who had once fled in the night with his mother, who had rebuilt his life from nothing, who understood, on a bone-deep level, what she and the twins were experiencing. "I don't want to disappear from your life," she admitted quietly, "after everything you've done for us." Ethan's hand found hers on the swing between them, his touch warm and steady. "Then don't," he said simply. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Rachel felt herself leaning toward him, drawn by something that had been building slowly, cautiously, over their weeks together. Then her phone buzzed in her pocket, shattering the moment. She pulled it out with trembling fingers, already knowing who it would be. Another message from the unknown number. Did you really think a few cameras would keep me away? I'm closer than you think. Always have been. Ethan read the message over her shoulder, his expression hardening. That's it, he said, standing abruptly. I'm calling Jim. We need to sweep the property again. Check for surveillance. Rachel followed him inside, cold fear replacing the warmth she'd felt moments before. As Ethan made the call, she checked on the twins, finding them still asleep, Noah's arm protectively draped over his sister even in slumber. The security team arrived within 20 minutes, moving efficiently through the house and grounds with specialized equipment. Rachel and Ethan waited in the kitchen, the silence between them heavy with tension. Ms. Miller, Jim said, entering the kitchen with a small device in his gloved hand. We found this in the garden, near the roses you've been tending. Rachel stared at the tiny camera, no larger than a button. How? She whispered, her voice failing. Professional grade. Jim explained grimly. Wireless, battery-powered. Could have been tossed over the fence by someone who knew what they were doing. Are there others? Ethan asked, his voice tight. We're still checking, but I don't think so. This one had a clear view of the back porch, the kitchen windows. Jim's expression was apologetic. I'm sorry, Mr. Harris. We sweep regularly, but this is new technology. Easy to miss if you're not specifically looking for it. After the security team left, promising increased patrols and more frequent sweeps, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. He's watching us, she said, her voice hollow. All this time, thinking we were safe. Ethan sat across from her, his own frustration evident in the tense line of his shoulders. We are safe, he insisted. The house is secure. He can't get past the gate, past the security team. But he's out there, Rachel said, looking toward the darkened windows. Waiting. Planning. She shook her head. I know Travis. He won't stop. Not until... She couldn't finish the thought. The possibilities were too terrifying to voice. Rachel. Ethan said gently, reaching across the table to take her hand. I won't let him hurt you or the children, but I think we need to consider our options more urgently now. She nodded, knowing he was right. The FBI's offer of witness protection no longer seemed like an overreaction. It might be their only chance at a truly fresh start. I'll make the call in the morning, she agreed. But tonight, I don't think I can sleep. Then we'll keep watch together, Ethan said simply. They moved to the living room, where the security monitors had been duplicated on a secondary system. Rachel curled into one corner of the sofa, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, while Ethan took the armchair nearby. They talked quietly through the night, about their childhoods, about the dreams they'd had before fear had reshaped their lives, about the future they hoped the twins might have. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Rachel felt a strange calm settle over her. The decision had been made. They would enter witness protection, testify against Travis, and build new lives far from his reach. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges she couldn't yet imagine, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them. Ethan, she said, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the windows. Thank you for everything, for showing me that not all men are like Travis, that there's still goodness in the world. Ethan smiled, the warmth of it reaching his tired eyes. You did the hard part, Rachel. You got yourself and the kids out. You're rebuilding. I just provided a safe place for you to do it. She shook her head, knowing it was far more than that. He had given them not just safety, but dignity, had treated her as an equal, respected her decisions, never once making her feel like she traded one controlling relationship for another. The peace of the moment was shattered by the harsh blare of the security alarm. Ethan was on his feet instantly, moving to the control panel as Rachel rushed upstairs to the twins, who were already awake and wide-eyed with fear. What's happening? Noah demanded, standing protectively in front of Lily. Just a security check. Rachel lied smoothly, gathering them close. Remember the drills we practiced? We're going to the safe room now. She guided them to the reinforced room Ethan had shown them during their first week, a converted closet with steel-lined walls, a separate ventilation system, and its own security monitors. Once inside, she locked a heavy door and turned to the screens, where she could see Ethan moving through the house, Jim and 2 security officers visible on the perimeter cameras. "Mom!" Lily's voice was small. "Is Dad here?" Rachel crouched to her daughter's level, brushing the hair from her face. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we're safe in here. No one can get to us." On the monitor, she watched Ethan conferring with Jim near the gate, their expressions grim. The security breach appeared to be at the far corner of the property. The fence cut cleanly, professional work. "He's getting closer," Noah said, his young face solemn as he watched the screens. "Isn't he?" Rachel pulled both children close, wishing she could shield them from this reality. "Yes," she admitted, "but we're not going to let him find us. We're going to go somewhere new, somewhere he'll never think to look. With Ethan?" Lily asked hopefully. The question caught Rachel off guard. She hadn't discussed with the twins what Ethan's role might be after they entered witness protection. The program typically allowed no connections to their previous lives. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But Ethan will always be our friend, even if we can't see him for a while." Noah's face fell, but he nodded with the stoic acceptance that broke Rachel's heart. He had grown attached to Ethan in their weeks together, finding in him a model of what a man could be: kind, respectful, strong without being threatening. The door to the safe room opened after a series of coded knocks, revealing Ethan and Jim. False alarm. Ethan said, though his expression belied his words. Someone cut the fence, but the security team swept the property. No one got through. Jim nodded in confirmation. "We're doubling the patrols and installing motion sensors along that section of the fence." "But Ms. Miller..." He hesitated, glancing at the twins. "We should discuss next steps." Rachel understood his meaning. "Kids, why don't you go get dressed? We'll have breakfast in a few minutes." Once the twins had left, Jim's expression turned grave. The cut was professional work. Clean, precise. And there was this. He held up a small envelope in a gloved hand, left at the breach point. Rachel's blood ran cold. "What does it say?" Jim handed the envelope to Ethan, who opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph, Rachel and the twins on the back porch, taken from a distance but clear enough to identify them. Written across the bottom in bold marker. "Soon. We need to move you," Jim said firmly. "Today. This location is compromised." Rachel looked at Ethan, who nodded in agreement. "I have another property," he said. "More remote than this one. We can be ready to leave within the hour." "And the FBI?" Rachel asked. "I've already called them," Ethan replied. "They'll meet us at the new location tomorrow. Until then, we stay together, stay vigilant." As they prepared to leave, gathering only essential items and the few treasured possessions the twins had accumulated during their stay, Rachel felt a strange mixture of grief and determination. Willow Creek had become a sanctuary, a place where healing had begun. Leaving felt like surrendering something precious. Yet as she watched Ethan help the twins into his car, security personnel creating a protective formation around them, she knew the true sanctuary had never been the house itself. It was the safety they had created together, the trust they had built, that would go with them wherever they went next. The car pulled away from Willow Creek, following a circuitous route designed to detect and lose any potential tail. In the back seat, the twins sat quietly, their small hands clasped together. Beside her in the driver's seat, Ethan drove with focused concentration, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors. "We're going to be okay," Rachel said softly, as much to herself as to the others. Ethan glanced at her, his expression softening briefly. "Yes," he agreed, "we are." And despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that Travis was still out there, still hunting them, Rachel believed him. Not because he was stronger or wealthier or more capable than Travis, but because he had shown her a different kind of strength. The kind that protected without controlling, that supported without demanding, that loved without possession. As they drove toward an uncertain future, Rachel realized that Travis had already lost, even if he didn't know it yet. He had lost because she was no longer the frightened woman who had fled in a broken-down car. She was stronger now, more determined, and she wasn't alone. The road stretched before them, winding through forests and fields toward the mountains in the distance. Somewhere ahead lay a new beginning. Different names, perhaps new identities, new challenges, but also freedom. Real freedom. Not just from Travis, but from the fear that had shaped her life for so long. Lily's small voice broke the silence. "Ethan, will you still tell us stories in the new house?" Ethan met the child's eyes in the rearview mirror, his smile gentle. "Every night, if you want." "And can we plant a garden?" Noah asked, his voice hesitant but hopeful. "Like Mom did here?" "Absolutely," Ethan assured him. "The new place has even more space for growing things." Rachel listened to this exchange, her heart full. Whatever came next, witness protection, testimony, rebuilding their lives from scratch, they would face it together, not as victims running from danger, but as a family moving towards something better. The sun broke through the clouds as they crested a hill, bathing the car in warm light. Rachel closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to imagine the future. Not just survival, but a life filled with the ordinary joys she had once thought forever beyond her reach. Mornings without fear, laughter without consequences, love without conditions. It wouldn't be easy. Travis would fight the charges. The transition to new identities would be challenging, especially for the twins. There would be days when the past reached out with cold fingers to remind them of what they had endured. But as the car continued its journey, carrying them toward sanctuary, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of the trapped, but the steady, growing confidence of someone who had glimpsed freedom and would never again settle for less. "We're almost there," Ethan said softly, as the road began to climb into the foothills. Rachel nodded, reaching back to squeeze her children's hands. "Yes," she agreed. "We are." The journey wasn't over. Perhaps it never would be entirely. But they were moving forward together toward the light. And for now, that was enough.